So I've had a few podcasts in the pipeline now for a while. A couple ideas I've had and some people I want to get on the show. But like the idea originally was like I was going to record all these things really quick in tandem. I'm like, I can't fucking do that. Like, that's exhausting emotionally. So I said, well, I'm just going to stick with the once a week thing for the most part. And then Log and Magdalene had a schedule that would only allow for the same weekend and ruined my plans. So now we're going to go to the other side of the coin, to someone who's been extremely flexible and just like, whatever, dude, like whatever you want to do. And, you know, it's somebody that you probably would not have guessed this person was coming on the show or that we're going to talk about what we're talking about. But it was something that for us, it just made sense. I met this lady at Guardian Con for about all of 8 seconds. We like shook hands, we smiled at each other, but we knew a lot of the same people, and we were enjoying a very particular moment with a certain gentleman by the name of my name is Bife. He was drinking a fruity drink, and that was the moment when I met this individual and announced myself as like, hey, I'm fucking Beard Grizzly's cohort. Like, oh, like you. And then Bife goes off. It was hilarious. And we'll probably go more into the story here in a second. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, GrnEyedMusikLvr. Let me actually, you know, have her seeing on the screen would be nice, right? Right? Now you're on the screen. You're live.
Yeah. Yeah. What's up?
How's it going?
It's going.
So I can only imagine it from your perspective. You're at a table with Bife and Grizz. One of your co-hosts, I forget which one, and
Blue.
Wasn't Unknown there as well?
Unknown was there. He was sitting next to Bife.
Right. And, you know, around comes this school bus-sized red-bearded guy. You're like, oh shit, where's this going? And it's Guardian Con though, right?
It's Guardian Con. There's gonna be everybody and anybody shows up.
That is true. And right after, like Grizz introduced all of us, and I hung out for a few minutes, and that's when James proceeded to have the fabled fruity drink.
Oh God, I want that clip. I need Beard to send me that video clip because he actually has it.
Yeah, I know, and I was gonna put it. I have a real quick Vidoc that I made. It's a 23-minute Vidoc of Guardian Con. And I was like, let me have the fucking thing. He's like, you didn't shoot it. I'm like, come on, dude, I'll give you credit. Like, I want to put it in there. And he's like, nope. So all I got is this lame video of me and Bife hugging, which is like,
well, it's something.
It's me and
it's something.
It's good. You know, and James is awesome.
Oh gosh. Now the thing is, what I can't remember for sure, if that drink itself is the one that Cosmo sent over, because Cosmo and Deej sent over a drink to Bife. And we find out a little bit later that that drink was a virgin drink, like a virgin pina colada or something like that. And Bife had chugged it. And Bife was already slightly inebriated at this point anyway. And he's chugging it. And we're all like cheering him on at the table. And Beard, oh my God, that video is so funny. But he, immediately after finishing the drink, he acts even more drunk than he had been. So it's just like, dude, if that's the virgin drink, you are an entertainer by heart. Oh, hey, buddy.
Yeah, you could tell by his like enthusiasm. Like, for one thing, like I think is, if anything, like, even if he was guilty of drinking orange juice all night, right?
Right.
From my perspective, like, here's a guy who has such raw, unbridled enthusiasm. Was like, you know what? It may get a bit creepy if I continue this throughout the night. So I'll just act drunk and it'll work out.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a goofball.
Yeah, and then you contrast that with Beard, myself, and Mylan, who had plied ourselves with scotch the night before, to major excess. And there's video of it on this channel. You're welcome to watch it, and it's funny. We're screaming Malin at him at large, large volumes, and you know. And then he was like ghost banning people in my chat. It was quite good. It was fun.
Were you there for when the number 4 lore thing that happened?
No. Oh wait, no, I was. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was.
So it was right after the panel that they did, the lore panel. And Bife, Beard, and Blue, or not Bife, Beard, and Blue, Bife, Mylan, and Blue. Beard was there too. But
that's like a song or like a children's book. Bife, Mylan, and Blue. Beard was there too.
It rolls off the tongue really well.
It does.
But they were signing autographs and stuff like that in line, and apparently, Mylan started putting number 1 lore, because there's like that whole thing between Bife
Right.
and Mylan. And so Bife started firing back by changing his 1 into a 4 in the signature line. I'm like, you guys are just little shitheads to each other. Come on.
Yeah, they really are.
God.
It's really funny, and especially now, like for me, like I'm not a lore guy, and spoilers for those of you that don't know, Focus Fire Chat. This is this lady's baby, and arguably like the best outlet for lore that isn't, you know, Ishtar Collective itself.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And I don't watch it live often. I watch it after the fact. I'm that guy. Because especially on Friday nights, that's my community night. And by the time...
Right.
Because the thing is, like, I don't want to show up to your stream fucked up on, like, 6 beers. Like, it's not going to, like, what do you mean? Vexer milk? What? Fucking... You know, it's not gonna bode well. So it's better for me to watch it later.
Right.
But it's weird. Like, ever since Guardian Con and a couple chance meetings, I'm kind of like flowing in and out of these different lore tribes because you're all different, right? You know, and then I did the podcast last week with Log, who's a whole other beast, man.
Oh, yeah. He
Love
is.
that guy.
His music videos crack me up.
Oh.
It's so good.
Did you see his machinima? Do you even rift, bro?
I didn't see that one, no.
It's
I
from
haven't
like a
seen
year
that
ago. It's, I'll put it this way. He did a full-blown machinima, and the opening is, he's like, there's something about this guy. I can't put my finger on it. And he's got like it's a male voice, and it's an exo, but it's a female exo body.
Oh, God.
And then he figures out, it's like, oh. You're like, oh. And it goes through this whole thing. You know, this guy, he writes comedy and narrative a lot better than he would ever admit to himself out loud. You know what I mean?
Right.
But be that as it may, we could socialize all afternoon, and I would love to do that, but that's not really why we're here.
It's all right.
I have a graduate degree in education and curriculum instruction. You've actually been an educator in the field for several years. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I taught, and I'm actually out of education now based on moving into a new state and the licensing hoops that you'd have to jump through again. But I taught K through 12 music in Kansas for 5 years, and I taught anything from preschool, kindergarten. Preschool was like every once in a while, but kindergarten all the way up to high school choir, and I taught band for a while as well in small districts and medium-sized districts. Never got into huge classrooms, but I did work with a band that was 90 people, so
nice.
It's a thing.
Yeah, and it's something where I think that's a unique perspective on education as well, because you're not just teaching, you know, the basics. You're teaching self-expression, which I always kind of go to Kevin Smith on this. He goes, "How can you possibly fail at self-expression?" Which is, it's subjective.
It is. But
at the end of the day, like it's a matter of my counter argument, especially when we're talking about the education of music and me being a musician as well. Like that's even like, oh my God, we can share everything, you and I. It's pretty cool to me. So, to me, when you learn a technique on a musical instrument, it gives you the toolbox to express yourself in a more varied and dynamic way. Comes from the guy whose drumming sounds like a jackhammer hitting, you know, steel. That's fine.
Hey,
that's my jam.
Double bass is fine. But as far as learning how to give self-expression, a lot of the times is giving kids the opportunity and the freedom to not be in an environment where they're going to be judged immediately. Because that's what buttons them up half the time, is that they feel like they're going to be judged by everybody, and so they don't do it.
And especially when we're talking about music teaching to the younger children, I think that's really what that's about. You know, I remember back when I was that age, and hitting the triangle or the block, and I even then I had musical tendencies, and I'm like, this is stupid. Like, why? Because to me at the time it was like having a PS4 controller, and here you can have the X button. Like, fucker, give me the whole thing. And I think you're always going to have kids that are going to react that way. But to some of those kids, it's the first chance they've ever had to just do something.
Right. I mean, there's different philosophies that music teachers follow. There's like the Suzuki method, which is super, super structured. And then there's like Dalcroze, which is very free form. I mean, there's different philosophies for sure in how you teach them. I tended, when I was teaching elementary, early elementary especially, I tended to give them basic guidelines, but not give them what they had to do. So they had a lot more freeform play and were able to express themselves a little bit differently.
Yeah, and that's, I feel that that's a big part of music, and we talk about as expression. My favorite book is a book called The Art of Changing the Brain by James Zoll. I don't know if you're familiar. For those of you not familiar, this book is by the Dean of the University of Maryland, I believe, Dean of Education out there. And he's also an award-winning neurologist. So this guy takes the educational principles and the ideas of neurology and links them together and poses this idea that if you can create an emotional context when you provide information, it will stick at a much higher rate. And by virtue of that, you will then not only engender growth of learning, but in some cases, even a desire to learn because you're now like putting endorphins with learning. And I was like, wow. And it's an obscenely easy read for what it is. And
it's extremely common sense to talk about, but it's in some ways a little bit more difficult to implement.
Right, because you have to understand what kind of emotions, what kind of brain chemistry you have to be able to conjure while you're doing this. Like, you wouldn't, like, it isn't as simple as, like, I'm teaching the Civil War and I really want to get, like, through their head, so I'll show them North and South. Although it's an example, it can give you them an emotional perspective or context, but that's not giving them the emotional impact. You have to create the lesson
to them.
right, and that's kind of the thing. I look at that, and I was into that book 6-7 years ago or something,
right?
And I'm looking at, this is gonna date me, guys. Y'all know I'm old, but like I'm looking at the kids coming up now, and I'm going, did no one read that book? Like,
it's so much anymore. It seems like we're giving kids material to read without giving them the chance to engage in the reading itself. I remember reading The Scarlet Letter. I remember reading Animal Farm, Shakespeare, all the standards that like they force upon you. Uncle Tom's Cabin. I mean, just all of those. And I don't remember having a whole lot of connection to them for some of them. Animal Farm more so. I had more connection to that one, and probably Scarlet Letter as well. But a lot of them I don't remember connecting to because there's no adjustment to create relevance. And that, I think, is a big problem as far as like getting kids to read about different things or engage in like the North and South, Civil War stuff. History was actually my weakest subject in school. I could care less about American history back in high school. World history was a different story, but U.S. history, I did not care because it seemed like a bunch of greedy people just doing greedy things over and over, which, granted, older and wiser, you learn things. But as far as having a teacher that could help create a connection, I remember having a history teacher who made us do a union debate, essentially debating to get union rights or get rights from big companies. And he put us in those positions to be able to argue for and argue against. And that, we had basic structure of what we were supposed to argue for, but you had to create your own debate. And so I became a lot more aware of the various arguments and the various tendencies that those unions tend to argue for, or those businesses tend to argue against. Like, how do you structure this and why it happened? Because I was able to engage in it more. But.
And that's the thing, that it's all about context. It's all about how do you get that information? Because it's, even when we were growing up, you just have information just thrown at you all day long, like Ninja throwing stars, and you're just dodging them like, I don't care. And
teaching to the test instead of teaching to the child.
Exactly. Outcome-based education. Like, I heard about that phrase while I was still in high school, and I'm like finally someone understands, like, this will never reach me. And even my daughter, who will be 15 in March, she's having to deal with it too.
Right.
Not as bad as it used to be, but it's still pretty fucking bad.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're trying to change it with like the Common Core ideas, but even that is outcome based still.
Right. What ends up happening, because the question is, how do you measure, the question, how do you have a standardized idea of measuring, or some litmus for measuring adhesion of an idea? And but the thing is, it's not just about that. Like, if you look at the outcome base to a certain degree, I get it. The problem is that once the child or student, let's be fair, once the student, demonstrates a clear understanding of the subject matter, our education system does not allow that student to move on.
Right.
And they're stuck. And that's when we start to lose some of the most intelligent kids.
Right.
I rebelled all through high school. I was like, this is stupid. I've learned all this. And to the point where I was a guy who didn't do homework. I would ace the tests.
Oh, yeah. I'm there with you on that one.
Yeah, geometry, I had a deal with the teacher. He says, look, if you really don't want to turn in the homework, that's fine. If you get a B plus or better on the test, I'll just give you a mark on the homework. Don't worry about it. But if you get a C or lower, I expect that all that homework to be turned in by the end of the term.
Right.
Never had to turn in homework. He was totally cool about it. And
that's awesome.
But then I went to Algebra 2 the next year. Different teacher. He's like, you're an amazingly smart dude in math, but you're not doing the homework. I got to fail you. And I'm like, what?
Right.
Like, what? Like, it just didn't make sense. Like, how can you fail me? Like, I know this better than anyone else in this class. I do. How am I failing this course just because I didn't do the extra work? That's stupid. Then the next year I do Algebra 2 again, and now I've got a chip on my shoulder.
Right.
I'm barely getting by. And then at the end of the year, basically the teacher pulled me aside and says, I could fail you right now if I wanted to. I could fail you right now for what you did last year in this other class, because that was a disrespect to him, was a disrespect to this department, and you're not doing well enough to clearly pass you. It's a decision-making thing, because your tests are good and the score was this. I'm like, for fuck's sake, lady, do I know it or not? I understand being upset that, maybe I upset you, maybe I upset your peers, and I understand that. But I know the fucking shit. Like, I know what I'm doing. And I just don't think that that's fair to a student to do that. And you hear about that kind of thing all the time.
Right. I mean, the problem is that what are the teachers really aiming at teaching? Are they aiming at teaching discipline and adhering to the curriculum? Or are they teaching the curriculum itself? Are they teaching the concepts? I mean, there's so many different things that teachers tend to focus on more than anything.
Right.
That was like one of the biggest contingencies in my class when I was teaching high school choir, is that if you can prove to me you understand what I'm doing by performing it, or by being able to explain it in a very cohesive sense, I'm not going to sit there and make you do worksheets or crap like that, because frankly, if you understand it, you understand it. Application, I get you do need to test it, but in choir, application is the performance.
Right.
90% of the time. I mean, there's moments where if you're going to teach music theory, yeah, sure, application of knowing intervals and shit like that, but that's not a high school class. That's a college class almost at that point.
And, when I was in middle school, I started out, I really wanted to do drums. I don't remember wanting to do drums, but my mother swears I wanted to do drums. I'm like,
oh, I'm sure.
I think you're retconning it, Ma. And then I ended up doing saxophone instead, which is like,
oh yeah,
yeah. And I did saxophone for 3 years, and I was third chair. I was good at it, wasn't great at it.
Right.
I had no passion for it. And then sometime towards the end of my 7th grade year, after we'd moved and my parents had retired, I was like, yeah, I do want to play drums, because out of nowhere, somewhere, like, I don't know if it was the Black Album that did it. My parents will tell you it was the Black Album. And I'll be like, no, I was actually Napalm Death Scum, but I couldn't play that. But I could play Sad But True on the drums. So I was like, and it just kind of happened. And the thing is, I never tried to get back into band as a drummer at that point. 9th grade, I was still doing sax. And what ended up happening, they were going to go to Belgium that year. It was going to be this big thing, but my other classes weren't doing so hot. And my parents pulled me from the trip.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, why the fuck am I playing saxophone then? Fuck this.
Right.
And so I stopped playing saxophone altogether, and right around then was when I started taking drums more seriously. And then I got a drum kit. My dad helped me like refinish it and everything else. And I learned so much about drums by virtue of he and I having to take this thing apart and refinish it.
By doing it.
That emotional connection and everything. And then I just sat and did it and learned. So now fast forward to my senior year, I go to, pardon me, one step back. I went into marching band, was not enrolled in a music class at all. And I said, I want to be in the marching band. And they're like, well, what have you done? And I'm like, I can play trap kit really, really well. And they're like, okay, can you read music? No. Well, here, do cymbals. Let's see if you can hang. And I could.
Yeah.
And so I slogged it out. And we ended up going to Colorado on that, and it was pretty cool. But
nice.
The experience itself of marching band, I was like, this is lame as fuck. And I always make the joke, like I always like had a hard time with the uniforms of marching band, and yet then would then go on to play would play in black metal bands where like you have to wear the paint and the spikes, and it's like uniform. Different thing though.
Oh yeah, I mean, God, marching band uniforms are just so stinking restrictive.
They're stinking.
Yeah, that too. That too, and they're just so incredibly thick fabric. I luckily did not have a formal marching band all the way through school. I did end up teaching marching band during my my student teaching, which was rather amusing considering that I did not have much of a background in it whatsoever. But yeah, restrictive band form, there are some band pieces out there that allow for creative expression in it, but most of them it's you play the notes on the page. And your creative expression comes through your dynamic changes and shit like that. But it's still fairly restrictive. Creating the thing, it's so hard to do with music because there's not a lot of improv taught anymore. And improv is scary to a lot of fucking people.
Yes.
And you said you played saxophone. I played saxophone as well. I played saxophone through college, and improv scared the shit out of me for years, and it's intimidating.
Right, because on any woodwind instrument, you run the risk of sounding like a dying flamingo if you're not careful. You know, anyone who's listening to a John Zorn record will tell you that. You know,
right?
And you're like, what the fuck? And there's that fine line where it goes from like unintelligible noise to something resembling art, which you can say with any instrument, but saxophone, woodwind, for some reason, for me, that's the one that's like, if you're going to flop your proverbial woodwind dick on the table, that's the one, you know, like improv for that. It's like, you know, because you can kind of fake it with your brass instruments.
Yeah, because you have 3 fucking vowels. You can just move them as fucking, I've had this conversation so many times. It's
if you got the right embouchure on a brass instrument, don't worry about it.
Right.
Like, it's not hard.
Right.
Comparatively. I'm not hating on tuba players, mind you.
No. Well, tuba is one other fucking beast in and of itself. It's like, dear God, farts for days. But
the brass elephant.
Right. But saxophone's like the big one for improvisation. You see it in clarinet too. But any of the woodwinds, because you're dealing with all fucking 10 fingers, multiple keys on top of each of those fingers most of the time. And there's a lot of ways to mess up. And if you don't know your chords, if you don't know your keys that you're dealing with, it's a fucking mess. So
it's gonna be a train wreck. And so here I go, self-taught, still can't read music. Going my senior year, And I said, Doc, I don't want Dr. Booker. Well, always, I love that man to death, Dr. Roderick Booker. He was the one that kind of inspired me. He didn't understand anything I was trying to accomplish, but he wanted to make sure I got there. Because at the end of my junior year, I had opted to do a small talent show performance with a keyboard player.
Right.
And he was like, what? He just didn't get it. Like, because we were doing like this Depeche Mode meets Napalm Death kind of thing, and he wasn't getting it.
Right.
But he let us use the trap kit. He let us use the equipment, whatever. I came to him and I said, I'm not going to do marching band anymore. I just don't have the time. I'd really rather focus on my drums and like really focus. Can I join symphonic and try to like learn some theory? He says, sure. There's no precedent for this, but I'll let you in. He says, my ask of you is that, you know, when things don't click, you speak up, because these other people have been learning their craft for years and years and they have a formal training, whereas you have raw talent that they may not have, but you don't know any of the structure. Like, you lack context. Some of them lack natural ability, and somewhere in the middle,
right,
you gotta meet your peers. So it kind of worked out that way. And it was like the geometry thing where he couldn't test my music reading. He couldn't test that. But what he would do is let me sit in for all the other tests. And then I'd go up there and having learned it by ear. And if I knew it well enough by ear, I was good. And then I'd show up for the show and I'd get the A. And sure enough, I did.
Right.
But in my spare time, like, he was trying to teach me how to like write, you know, drum kit music. And I had no concept of it. Like, he would show me and I'm like, I think I get it. And to this day, like, sequencing stuff is very difficult for me to do.
I will tell you, as somebody who has written, like, done arrangements of fucking songs for musicals and shit, trap set is the hardest thing to write for, period.
There you go.
I do not think it is an easy instrument to write for, because you have so many different variables that you have to deal with, because you have all the different drum heads, you have multiple types of cymbals, you have any other type of auxiliary you attach to it, whether it's a fucking wood block or a cowbell or whatever. There's a lot of shit that goes into writing trap set. And I basically, in college, when I was writing orchestrations for shit, if I knew the drummer, I'd basically say, go play this style, have fun.
Right.
That's it. Because I did not know as much about the trap set and writing sequences and forms or styles as they did. Let them do it.
Yeah, it's a real. Then they have it coming from the other side, where I would do sessions from time to time, you know, years later, and I'd say, look, don't hand me music. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you want. Let me hear the track, and we'll sit down. We'll figure it out.
Right.
And it's right before I sat down to do this. This is part of why I was like, I have to record this no matter what. I just watched a documentary on Netflix about session players and how, like, they come in and all this stuff. And I was like, man, like, I remember what that's like. I remember, again, when you're young and you're playing music, I find that, like, you have a certain idea of how things are supposed to be, or and you're limited by your experience and your exposure to stuff. I had a pretty wide palette of music that I was into, but there's big chunks that were missing. For me, and it was and remains that classic rock kind of, like, you know, anything that's on like the, you know, like the AC/DC, you know, Ted Nugent, like you know, the bar staples. Never had I never had a second for. I jumped straight from Queen and Tears for Fears to Napalm Death and Morbid Angel. No middle ground.
Right.
Now, and I would also argue that a lot of the synth pop stuff, like Tears for Fears in particular, some of the heaviest music ever written, they just happen to use chintzy electronic instruments. If you put that stuff on a detuned, like, you know, tune a guitar in standard starting with A, and then, which a lot of death metal bands do, and then you have them play Tears for Fears through a damn, you know, triple rectifier amplifier, it's going to sound amazing. And people, I think, have these different ideas of how again, it comes from their education, right? It comes from this, like, this idea. She's like, education hard, I don't like it.
Yeah. But he doesn't like it either.
Structure's bad.
Hi.
Let people express themselves. Oh.
Pretty much.
But you were limited by those things. So I would go into a session, and for warm up, I'd be hearing these classic like payola riffs and or nuge or something like that. I would not know what it was. I'd be playing a totally different beat than what was in there. Like, wow, that was a really cool beat you put to that whatever song it was. I'm like, I thought that was you. They're like, no, man, it was this artist. I'm like, oh, okay. So we're gonna do this or what? And these are these little things you learn. But that for me was kind of come back to like our main ideas here, like your perspective, your upbringing, your bias, all has a kind of a role to play, whether you're the student or the teacher. And I feel like maybe the bias in the youth of America now is I can Google it, but then they don't Google it.
Right.
There's just kind of.
Yeah, I mean, and this can go into so many different topics that tend to be pretty salty. The whole idea,
sodium up.
Oh gosh, yeah. By just the concept that participation award type things, and that one's always a fun one to kind of go into because kids don't necessarily think they have to try because they always get something for it, and whether it's fucking a just pat on the back, recognition, oh great, you did the thing. I mean, yes, learning how to express yourself in a not necessarily a non-judgment zone, but I hate using safe space, but that's what it was in the classroom for me, because everybody in the classroom, no matter what they did, everything was okay. As far as like if they're playing and just experimenting with shit, everything was okay. Nothing was off the table. Did I have them fucking learn? Oh yes, you have to know your note names, all that shit. Yes, they still had to be able to identify all that crap. But when it came to doing solos or being able to play something for the concert, percussion instruments for the concerts, the kids had to demonstrate it. And there were soloists who were better than others, and they got it. And the other kids, yeah, great. Good job for auditioning. That was really brave of you. Keep working.
Right.
Because, I mean, it's such a fine line to say to a kid that, I'm sorry you're not good enough, versus great job, I'm glad you tried, you should try again later type thing. It's just, there's so many like tightrope walking you have to do, so much of that.
Because, you also, then there's the context of that student, of what can they take? Some students are driven by saying, you're not good enough yet. Yes. You will be, like, just saying you will be if you keep working it, but you're not now. And some of them will just be like, all right, let's go. Others will be crushed by it and never pick up the instrument again.
Do you think that there are more students who are the second one now than there used to be?
Yes. People give up way too easily. I think people allow themselves to get shut down. And I feel like there's you could even, we started off before the show talking about Destiny and talking about the Destiny community. You can see evidence of this in discussions about video games or any subject people are passionate about, where they're so insecure, you'll get one of two things. They'll either shut down or they'll start flinging personal insults immediately. And it's because they've never been taught that it's okay to have a differing viewpoint. Like this whole idea of like, and this is, again, a big failing of the educational system, in my opinion. Somewhere in the last 15 years, someone decided that facts and opinions are the same thing, apparently.
Well, yeah. That fucking shit.
Yeah. Because if they didn't have to like learn facts to get through school and they got their participation trophy, whatever they think must be right because they're being rewarded all the way along, right?
And then you get douchebags all the way through college. I mean,
we used to weed them out. Now we don't.
Used to. I mean, you kind of do a little bit still with sports, which I'm glad that still somewhat is there.
Sure.
Because there's A team and B team still. Now, granted, if you're in like a PE situation where everybody has to be able to play and everybody has to be able to participate, that's something totally different. But like, if you're trying out for a basketball team and you make A team, that's kind of a boost in the right direction. If you're on B team, you know you got to work your ass off to get bumped up to a starter on B team and then bumped up to bench on A team and work your way through the system.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like that in a lot of different areas anymore. And I guess I just don't really understand why we've gotten away from it so much, just because of parents being offended that their kid isn't the best.
I think you can put the nail on the head right there. You know, people do not want to have shit kids.
Yeah.
You know, my phrasing I'm about to use is going to be offensive to some of you listening at home, but it is a direct quote, so you can go after Jim Jeffries if you don't like it. Jim Jeffries had a great point. He said in one of his early stand-up specials, if you're a dumb cunt and your wife or husband is a dumb cunt and you have children, guess what they're going to be? Dumb fucking cunts. And it's a very brash and very, very, abrasive way to say it, but it's true. There's only so much that you can create from raw material.
And it's where we are, and this is something that you talked about earlier, we are a result of our surroundings. If you're going to act like a fucking asshole at home, guess what your kid's going to do at fucking school? They're going to act like assholes. That's just what it is. It's just...
Yeah.
I wish
that more people would understand what they reap what you sow kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just don't get that. I mean, I'll never forget the very first time I ever knew what racism was. And I was at the dinner table and looked at my dad and I said, "What's up?" And I said the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and he just stopped me and he's like, "Where did you hear that?" And I said, "Well, a kid stabbed me in the knuckle with a dull pencil after he called me it." And he started laughing hysterically. He's like, "Son, first of all, never use that word. I'll explain it to you another time." He says, "But if you were called that by someone, you have nothing to worry about because that person is stupid and will amount to nothing."
And jealous.
And the fun part is, I don't know if you can see this, chat, and then you won't be able to. The light's not good enough. I still have a graphite mark in my knuckle from where he hit me with that. That's how hard he stabbed me there.
Dumb.
He basically tattooed me with a thing. But it was just one of those moments. And I, he told me later what it was, but it kind of showed that like my parents had done such a good job of keeping me away from hatred, keeping me away from the negativity, which can backfire, and I think it really did with me.
Right.
First time I ever heard the word "fuck," we were watching The Breakfast Club together, and I went, and he's like, "Fuck you, like when the kid like at the end of it, he's crying, and I went, "Fuck," and he's like, "It's very bad word, never use it." I'm like, "Yeah, but what's it mean? I don't know what's going on in the film. Like, I don't care. Like, I won't swear, but what the fuck is going on?
Right.
And this was something where that was this weird thing. But then I think that smart parents and educators will recognize growth. So fast forward 10 years, and my dad and I are pruning trees in the front yard. And we're, getting the branches off. One of them slides off in a direction we weren't expecting. It slices my arm. I'm like, "Fuck!" And he's like, and I realized I had never said that in front of my father before. I'm 18 years old. That shouldn't matter. But I've never said this in front of him before. He goes, "You all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's hurt like a bitch." He says, "Sharp wood does that, son. Let's finish." I'm like, "All right." And I'm like, I got away with it. What the fuck?
Right.
Because anytime I heard him say it before, it was such power behind it with him. If he actually lost it to where he actually said that, you knew he was really mad, like red in the face and all that. But I always... Go ahead.
Well, okay, so one of the things I used to have to teach junior high kids, especially because junior high kids, they want to say it all the time, is proper place. Know where it is know that if you use it all the time, it's going to lose its effectiveness, just like you were saying. And B, knowing that you're not... To say that at school, it's like a job. If you said that at a job that is supposed to be like a high business type thing, that's not going to end well. So treating school like a job and saying, hey, this is not the place to say that kind of stuff, use different language. You can be creative in how you say it. You don't have to cuss, though.
Right.
And that was, there was a moment where I dropped a coral shell on my hand when we were putting it up one time. And I didn't cuss, but I just screamed out a random word. And they all knew that I cussed in my head and they all knew what was going on. But it's just like, you don't have to use those words. You can use other words.
Mm-hmm.
You're more intelligent than that.
Absolutely. And I think that when you reach that level of intelligence where you can use vocabulary in varying degrees of effectiveness, right? Mm-hmm. For me, then, and this is my path where I want to take the power away from all the negative stuff. I want to take all of it back. So I'm going to say fuck as much as I want because it's just a word. You know, George Carlin.
But you're an adult now, and it's your forum, and it's your. It's dependent on the place. You're not going to go into a symphony orchestra concert and yell fuck as loud as you can during the performance. That's just not the place to do it.
Although it would be kind of funny.
It would be kind of funny, and it would be a really neat way to segue into some metal type stuff going on.
Sure, absolutely. The thing I would argue though that there are certain how cool would it be to take the most beautiful London Symphony Orchestra, their choir, they had a 120-piece choir or something. Mm-hmm. Why not take one of the most beautiful ways of expressing oneself and then just have every word be fuck, but you could have it do this thing where, again, it doesn't have to be that staccato, vulgar. Right. It's just, it's a way of channeling the notes. You know what I mean? So what point does it become, in what context, where's the line drawn where now it becomes, oh, well, now this is bad?
I believe it's been done, but I can't tell you which composer did it. Mm-hmm. As far as writing out pieces, George Carlin style. And
sure.
The thing is though, so much of the music industry, when it comes to classical music, it has their neck in a frickin' brace half the time about what they're doing. Because it's just, oh my God. Yes, there are pieces out there that get into some raw and gritty stuff. I've done a piece on rape. I've done a piece on depression. Mm-hmm. There's some really, really neat pieces out there that talk about hard shit, but most of the community is just oh my God, you can't talk about that. That's not proper. You can't do that. That's not something we should talk about. You should just go back into your safe space, which safe space.
With that? What is that? It's the same thing. You have the exact same problem on the other side of the spectrum. Okay. Mm-hmm. In grindcore and death metal, for example, extreme music, if you're not singing about something really brutal, on some level, the assumption is that it's taking away power. Yeah, mm-hmm. It's taking the power away. Well, now you look at a band like The Senseless, which is a one-man band a friend of mine does. He's an Australian guy, used to be in a band called The Berserker. Right. And his first song he came out with was called Vacation. It was about a guy who was stuck at work and really wanted to go on vacation. And it's a brutal song. Mm-hmm. And he just ripped the Band-Aid off. Here. And he made what I lovingly refer to as cubicle metal. Right. It is artistically sound. It is really experimental, but it's more of an angel for people who aren't depressed, basically. Right. And it can be done. And I don't understand why there are some genres that just will not allow that to exist. Those juxtapositions.
I would actually say that it's mainly the consumers, in some ways, a lot of the consumers' fault, because we tend to box performers into what they can and cannot do.
Sure.
So think of Justin Bieber when he put out Despacito. And now, granted, this is probably the weirdest example I'm going to ever bring up on a show with metal and stuff like that. But I have very, very limited experience with metal, unfortunately, because I grew up with classic rock and my family did not like anything that was out of their little box. But Justin Bieber, when he did Despacito, everyone just went, kind of thing. Yes, it's a pop song, but it's Latin. A, he does not speak Spanish, and he got caught really, really bad about not being able to speak Spanish. But a lot of people had issues for a while until they realized that, hey, this can actually work a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And most artists don't feel like they can take that chance. Because if you do take that chance, half the time you get shut down because, oh, you're selling out, or what are you doing? This is not you. This is not your normal stuff. Who are you using your music from? I mean,
well, even a band like Queen, who was known for being chameleons.
Oh my God.
Like, they were known for being chameleons their whole career. Every so often, someone would come up and they're like, what? So, like, I always like to point because Queen is my favorite band, like, on the same head as Napalm. Those two, because to me, people are like, if you could just take 2 albums, I'm like, first Queen album and the Napalm Death Peel sessions, I'm good.
Right.
Those two I'm good. Because it covers all the emotional range that I need. But they did an album, I believe it was Hot Space. And they had a song, that's one where, I think was it Another One Bites the Dust? I want to say it was Another One Bites the Dust.
That's one of them.
That's from the game. But with one of the songs on one of those 2 albums, like, started charting in funk charts in the U.S. and played on predominantly black Motown radio stations, and people were really latching onto it, and would go to the shows and were shocked to find that these were a bunch of white Englishmen playing this stuff, and that it wasn't the only thing they played. And although it was a gamble that paid off for them at the time, they looked back on it and were like, how does that work? And again, this was 30 years ago.
Right.
We're not teaching our children to take risks anymore.
Well, is there a band today that you can name off that has the variety that Queen had? Because Queen had Bohemian, Another One Bites the Dust, Crazy Little Thing Called Love. I mean, all 3 of those are incredibly different. Incredibly different. But
and no one's taking those risks these days.
No, because we have a cookie cutter system as far as the music industry goes anymore. Everybody has to follow a formula, and every song is formulaic. This is going to sound really kind of awkward, but if I'm flipping through the radios, like the radio stations, and I hear a certain chord progression, not even paying attention to the words, I can tell you 90% of the time what genre, even so much as saying, that's that's Christian music, like that's Christian rock, or that's Christian metal, or that's rock and roll, like 90s, and everything's so formulaic, and it really started happening, I think, in the 90s.
Yeah,
because
it really
did. 80s, you still had some variants, and you started seeing that a little bit, but 90s pop just kind of wrecked everything.
Yeah, and I think a lot. You figure that's where the industry was going. Internet comes out, and then everyone wants to sound like what they think success is. Whereas in the 80s, success was not manufactured so much as they said, this is really good, we're going to get behind this, and they'd market the shit out of it. Like Ray Parker Jr. did Ghostbusters in 84.
Right.
What I did not know, and what this film taught me, was that he was a session musician before that. And he'd written a lot of #1 hits, but never got credit for it. And he was going to quit, and then they're like, hey, we've gone through 24 artists trying to get the song, and Ivan Reitman is insistent that the word Ghostbusters be in this track. Can you give it a whirl? And he's like, I don't want to do this shit, man. Like, we'll give you $50,000 whether we keep it or not. He's like, all right, I'll do it. So he stayed up for 3 days and wrote it, and then that became like what he was known for and stuff. And it was a risk because it was something that he didn't necessarily believe in artistically from a lyrical standpoint, but he was able to make a song he got behind, and then did a whole album based off the success of that song that also went really far. It isn't always about saying, I want to express myself 100% and will society respect me? It's, will I take a risk to go outside of what I know?
Right.
I was listening to a record that I recorded 6 years ago. The last thing I participated in that got released. And I was like, I sat back and I was like, Jesus Christ. Because drum-wise, it did not let up for a single second. Like, dynamics are hard to come by in grindcore. But
it's hard to come by in any sort of world with drums. Just saying.
And the thing is that I've managed to find ways to do it. Like one of the things I used to do a lot of, and I tried to do, you have a blast beat, which is just, 16th or 30 seconds alternating with the kick, bop, 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 which is fine. But to me, it's like, well, the right hand, all that may also be doing alternates. Why can't we do something here that is now musically interesting? So what I would do a lot of times is like, I would hit pitched cymbals to match the guitar tone. I would do polyrhythms on the bell, whatever.
Right.
To kind of
break it up.
Give some texture to it. Well, by the time I got to that record, which is the fourth record I'd done with them, I knew it was my last record. They didn't know that. I did. And I had written some of the most over-the-top blast beat, like 270 to 300 beat per minute stuff, and just went, let's just go for it. And we rehearsed it for a year. Now we go into the studio, and I'm playing it like at least 20% faster than we had written it. And I'm listening back to the stuff now, and I'm like, fuck, it's too fast. It's too fast. The whole record's too fast. It should have been about 10 beats per minute slower throughout the whole record at a minimum. But it's cool. And the songs are great, but I can look back on it and say it's just too much.
There's something to be said for having experimental type things like that, where you are pushing yourself technically. Oh gosh, now I can't remember the name of the band. Fuck. There's a band that I listened to, and I'm gonna go and find it real quick because we were talking about it the other day. And Mars Volta. There we go. Mars Volta put out some really good experimental shit. Where they're working on all sorts of different things. Polyrhythms was one of the big things, but also working in multimeters, doing 7/8 instead of your typical 4/4 meter, which is what everybody uses. And it was interesting and it was fun to listen to. I like those kind of albums, especially if you put it out saying, I'm working on the technicality, putting out, just trying something. No one's pushing themselves anymore with those kind of albums, it seems. They're not pushing the boundaries of their writing capabilities or their playing capabilities anymore. They're just doing something
unless you go
safe.
to like those far extremes. And then by the time you get to those far extremes, a lot of those things aren't going to be immediately palatable, and you may miss it. A band called Meshuggah is an example where they are just a droning dirge. Lots of low E, and they use the core of like the higher registers more as effect, more than they do for melody. Everything is being used as percussion, every last thing. And the drummer, Thomas Hake, there's a couple of different songs he does where he's doing like a different time signature in his feet than on his hands. So where like he'll write like a 5/6 or whatever. So he'll let that run for 4 bars. And then I'll do 4/4 on top, but behind it. So in other words, like he'll have like the measures will overlap in this weird way, to where you could write it to where everything's stacked along and it meets everything meets at the end like a train track. He prefers to like kind of have it layered in this weird kind of almost like a lasagna, If you can visualize like the toppings meeting and doing this weird kind of interlocking thing, and when you first hear it, you're like, it just smacks you in the face. We're like, how is that humanly possible? But he's doing it.
Well, I mean, there's like classical music. Aaron Copland did that kind of shit too. I mean, and he's fairly modern in the classical world sense, but he would take multiple songs and just stack them on top of each other and listen to them. Hi.
He's like, I like Aaron Copland.
But he would just figure out polyrhythms and polytonic. That was also the fun thing that he got into. But the problem is that avant-garde type music like that, where they're really pushing the boundaries, our culture has gotten so used to hearing 1/4-5/1 or just a standard basic backbeat that they don't want to hear something that's a little bit outside of their comfort zone.
He was just really trying to support the point you're trying to make.
Yes.
Because he knows that makes you comfortable being outside of comfort zone. I'm just going to throw it out
he
there.
wants out is what he's asking for. He wants out of the room.
This is why I was lucky enough. I remember when I was looking at places, my studio is in the center of my apartment, and the door is in the front of the room all the way to the left. So I can leave it open without there being a real problem for noise or anything visually, and then Bo can kind of come and go as she pleases. But because I tried it once. I tried having her like shut in with me, and it did not work well. She's like, it was like jumping up, trying to like, I don't know how this doorknob works, but I know this is the thing that opens the door.
I know this is the thing to touch. You touch it and it opens, right?
And my touch is not working.
Yeah, my touch is broken. Can you fix it?
Hey, please.
Yeah.
I don't have opposable thumbs, Mom.
Yeah, my boys. Yeah, they're in here with me right now because Julie is cleaning up the house and she wanted them out of her way, so they get stuck in here with me in the office. Yeah.
Fair enough.
They're pretty good most of the time.
He's like, well, I'll stick around, I guess. It's good, all right, I guess. So, but and granted, we're talking about this in the context of musical expression, which I kind of had a feeling it would go down that road. But it does kind of come back to what we're instilling in young people. That confidence to, like, that kind of moral safety net of, like, look, you can try something and fail spectacularly, but you know what? You learn something from trying.
Right. It's going back to YouTube culture where this is what you're supposed to do versus do what you want and figure it out kind of thing. Because kiddos will learn how to play a backbeat via YouTube, and that's all they play the rest of their lives. They play exactly what the album had. If they're playing, pep band music especially. I had a kid who actually reminds me a lot of your story, who did not read music very well at all. And he was in our big band, but he was the best at picking up just whatever kind of beat you gave him, anything. As long as he heard it once, he could figure it out. The kid was awesome as far as like pep band type stuff because he was able to improvise and add the melodic aspects into drums that you really hope that your high schoolers start learning at that point, not just the percussive background noise that you always tend to think about with pep band.
Well, I think that when you teach yourself to do something, and when I taught myself on, I had mixtapes that I had in a boombox. I would pipe into my headphones, and I don't know what kind of boombox. I know what kind it was, and I could pick it out of a lineup, but I don't know what amp it had in it. But for some reason, regular old headphones that I'd cut and put into like these gun headphones, I could play along with drums. But then for some reason, later in life, I just could not find amps that were strong enough. It was weird. But I would play along to mixtapes I'd made of, like, it would go from Queen to Napalm Death to a John Williams composition from Indiana Jones to Cannibal Corpse down to Tears for Fears, and I would just kind of go through the whole thing, and there'd be stuff, like, especially with like the John Williams stuff, where it's not designed for trap at all. So I had to fill gaps. I had to do this combination, and what it forced me to do was experiment with the kit to do different things. Like a lot of rock drummers, a lot of jazz drummers even, don't pay attention to the fact that there's more to the cymbal than just smacking it.
Right.
You know, there's an infinite number of sounds that you can get out of that cymbal if you know where to hit it and when to hit it and how hard. And hey, Bo, come here.
With what kind of stick to hit it with, if you're actually using brushes or if you're using regular drumsticks or size of drumstick. Yeah, I mean, that aspect, like learning how to play music based off of one style, I think is bad. But what you did when you were trying John Williams stuff, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. There was a guy who was doing YouTube videos, and he had a freaking ginormous kid that he would use. But he would play along with classical music and actually would play with symphonies every once in a while. And I used to show that to a lot of my percussionists that, hey...
Derek Rowdy, probably.
I can't remember off the top of my head for sure. It's been probably 3 years since I've had to show any of his videos because I would have young percussionists be like, this is stupid. Why am I learning it like this when I want to be able to play like that? Why do I have to like classical music? It's like, you don't have to like it, but realize that you can create some really cool stuff along with classical music. Whatever you put on your headphones, you can make something work. You just have to be creative and willing to try different things that you're not used to. It can't just be that boom, boom, kind of thing. I mean, you can do a hell of a lot more than that. You can be a lot more creative. You just have to give it a shot.
Yep. I just posted a link in chat. This is Derek Roddy with the ASU Wind Ensemble. This is an example of what we're talking about. This is unlikely to be who you guys talking about, but this is an example where this guy's a death metal drummer. He's one of the best session drummers in the world, no matter what genre you play. But he's known for death metal, and he was playing that style along with this symphony orchestra, and it was really cool. I moderated his forum for years, and he's a great guy, and he was one of the guys that would really advocate, like, you can sit here and learn your meters and do all the exercises in the world and be technically perfect, but if you can't figure out a way to apply that in a way that is creative or saying something, what's the point of learning the technique if you can't express? And he was always pushing that through. And I always admired him for that, and we're still friends to this day. And he was always very supportive of the fact that I was the guy who would say, look, my left hand was what I was known for, that blast beat, that snare hit, and but what I was doing with the right hand, side of my body was trying to bring flavor to that, even though I may not be as fast or as technical as the next kid. You might remember something I'd written over something someone else had written. And that's the kind of thing, is like, being technically proficient is great, but unless you're taking it somewhere, it may not be as viable, because, and maybe that's part of it too, being technical for the sake of being technical. It's like, well then what?
Having technicality is good, because you kind of have to have some sort of basics to be able to really solidify understanding a beat. I mean, that sounds kind of awkward and a little backwards compared to what you were talking about, but
we've got to have the skill to pull it off.
Right. You have to have an internalized beat to be able to play anything. You can't just start banging on something and expect it to be musical. That's, I mean, to a certain degree it can be, but for most people, if you have no sense of beat, you will have a hard time dancing. You'll have a hard time marching along with somebody. You'll have a hard time playing any kind of music, or even just being able to follow music. Like, experiencing it becomes a lot more difficult, because you can't recognize the internal heartbeat of that song.
Right.
There are skills that you have that I would consider technical, that I think that any kind of drummer needs to have, and it has to be developed at a very, very young age. If you have a kiddo who does not listen to music, does not experience dance, does not experience any of that shit, by the time they get to their music teacher in kindergarten, they will not be able to sing, and they will not be able to understand beat. And those are the very first two things that a kindergarten music teacher teaches. They teach singing, and they teach beat. And that's most of the year. If your student or if your kiddo doesn't have anything at home to experience with, to be able to feel it, to be able to understand it, they have no background. So that teacher has to start from scratch. It can be done. I had a set of twins that were tone deaf as all get out. Could mostly get a beat. They were okay from time to time, but they had a little bit of trouble. It took me until 3rd grade for them before they could sing in tune, and keep a beat with everybody else, because they had nothing growing up that would help them establish it. There are skills that have to be there. Yeah. The basic stuff. Now, do you need to know what a fucking paradiddle is? Probably not. You can, like, a double paradiddle, triple paradiddle, whatever. You don't have to know what it is technically called or anything like that, but you can probably recreate it, and practicing it will make other things easier, but you don't have to have it at that point.
Right. And we all talk about the basics, but like we were talking about this whole thing with like Meshuggah and Copeland, they're doing these really crazy mashups of time signature. Like, you don't have to know that to be able to express. However, one of my mantras always was, if you can do 30-second notes with your feet at 280 doing eighth notes at 120 will be nothing for you if you know your meter. So take the technique as far as you want to go, but know that the technique does not replace creative innovation.
No, not at all. Just because you can do something does not make it artistic.
Yes, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And and that was something. That was the other end of that mantra. It was something I used to teach with lessons, which was really boiled down to learn all you want to learn. But when you apply, the technique itself is not itself music. It's not. No matter, because you can sit there and just sound like a fly farting, going at Doppler effect across the mic. It's like it doesn't matter at that point. And I think the same could be said for any raw knowledge, whether it's history, math, English, what have you.
Right.
It's the context, and it's something that we don't teach kids that anymore. We just don't. And they
I mean, it's not enforced, or it's not like pressed to teach. Because I mean, I taught that with music because it's a little bit easier for them to do that, especially choir. But because you have to, yes, you sing the notes on the page, but if you don't engage in the music, in the emotional draw of the music itself, it's not going to come across good. Period. You can do dynamics well, you can do all that well, but if you don't actually emotionally engage, it's not going to read right. Period. And so I feel kind of bad because I always pulled a little trick right when we got to contest time. One year I didn't actually have to pull any trick, but because we had a kid who had some serious medical issues, who couldn't come to contest with us. And you kind of have to play the emotional card with high schoolers sometimes if they don't automatically lock in. There are kids that will, but sometimes if you pull that emotional card and get them to sing with their heart in it for somebody else, that music immediately locks in and fixes so many problems. And it was cheating in some ways, and slightly manipulative, but we did well. We always got wins with it. Yep.
And it's really, you see that any good educator or leader is going to know that. And I think the best artists learn to do that on their own. Like you hear about actors in the method, right? People make fun of that. It's like, motherfucker, all the best artists do that. They just don't call it that. So like, it's kind of like, right, you have to engage yourself. Like, I'll give you an example. Like the last thing I ever played as a high school student, it was something I had no emotional stake in at all. I was playing Trap Kit for a choir, playing a Kansas song I had never heard before. Carry On My Wayward Son. I had never heard it in my life at that point. And I had to learn it. I had to learn it in 2 weeks to a point that I was comfortable playing it. This was a style that I just hadn't explored at all. Not really. Like it was like there's some Queen stuff that goes there, and certainly some Metallica stuff that kind of goes there. But if you don't know the tune and you have no connection to the tune, but I had to make it sound like I had to back these people up, make it give them like what they're looking for. And there was a guitar player that was in the chorus that we were playing along, and she had never played with anyone before, like at all ever. And that was a challenge in and of itself. So this is when I learned the value of being the driver, saying, all right, I'm just going to go, and I need you to stay with me. I promise you we'll get to the end. Just stay with me. We're going to be fine. So I went in saying, like, you don't have to like this song. You don't have to nail it exactly as it was recorded, but you got to nail the vibe, and you got to give these people something to really latch onto so they can give a great performance.
Right.
And I said, they're depending on you. You got to do this. I was like, kind of like, motherfucker, let's go. And so I did, and I added like little tiny flams here and there. I didn't go too nuts with the drums, but I kind of gave it some really fat back, a really nice big bottom end, and just really accentuated what little I had. And I kind of tried to like signal it to the chorus that this was going to be a little bit different than rehearsal. Go nuts, just the opening, like do 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 do, and then you do the plaque, the little flam there. But I just there's this. It's difficult to describe it as a musician. I'm sure you understand this, where it's like you just put a little bit more into it. It's not necessarily hitting harder, but you're hitting through it. So it's like boom, doom, 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 plot, doom, and then
Yeah.
that little, like, real big, solid, fat kick right before we went in. They got it, and we just hit it, and it was cool. I still hate the song. I hated the performance.
That's fine.
But they dug it, and they sung their hearts out, and it was cool because the chorus teacher, this was her student teaching, was teaching this high school chorus, and we had not gotten along during the process of rehearsal because she didn't understand what she was asking me to do. I'm like, I'm not that guy.
Right.
I says, you can't hand me the sheet of music. I'm not gonna be able to do it. I need you to be patient with me. You're going to trust me that I will do this for you, but I need you to understand. And she didn't get me. She was coming from a very formal background. I was coming from a completely informal background. But I was like, this kid needs to have this. Like, this was important to her, too. And I did respect her.
Right.
And she came up to me afterwards like, that was perfect. That's what I wanted the whole time. Like, I told you to trust me. And we hugged, and that was that. And then, but inside I'm going, oh shit, I pulled that off.
Right. And there's something for any kind of musical performance where you lock in with everybody else. And that's something that is really hard to teach. It's hard to teach in a regular classroom, I think, more than anything else. You can teach it on the basketball court, in sports a little bit better, but music, when you are performing something together and you feel every single person in that room, it changes a lot. It's engaging with others and actually working together,
right?
Having that teamwork. And it's
I
not
think
just the teamwork, the dream work type thing. It's literally, you can feel what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think with live performance, too, the thing that you can never prepare anybody for because of fear, but your audience. There is a vibe in the audience. And I think that when we're talking about, like, especially at high school and earlier, you're not usually playing to people that are engaged in what you're doing whatsoever.
Right.
At the
parents
college
that are
level,
going because they have to.
Right. Versus college, where, like, if you have, like, say, a marching band or band for, like, the football games and stuff, they're engaged because that's a big part of the whole spectacle.
Right. It's the culture.
Exactly. And then, of course, rock, jazz, musicians, so forth. The first time you play for a crowd, the first time you realize that what you're doing can impact someone else, it is really, life-changing. But then you look at, like, other parts of our culture that isn't an immediate thing that you can latch into.
Right.
And it becomes the opposite, where people will just throw their opinion out. They'll say whatever they feel like saying without any regard for what their audience is or what they could possibly, what the consequences of that is.
Right. Because destiny.
Because destiny.
It just goes back kind of to what has been happening online with the community too with that. I mean, it's a very generalized, what you're talking about is a very common thing across the board. It doesn't matter if you're talking about video games or if you're talking about engaging with your community on something, a political stance or whatever you're talking about. Actually, people really engaging with each other doesn't happen. You don't understand the other person anymore. You don't walk in their shoes anymore. That concept has disappeared for some reason, for some ungodknown reason. And the fact that we have people with the ability to be anonymous on the internet, or at least appear anonymous, like if you put something out there on Twitter and your face is in your Twitter feed, you could say that's not anonymous. I will tell you it is anonymous in so much as that you do not see the reactions of the people who see that tweet.
That's right.
You can put it out there and never have to deal with the consequences of it. And that pisses me off to high heaven. And I'm tired of seeing people who, for their own enjoyment and their own reward, creating a toxic environment and reaping benefits of people who want to also feel toxic, because that's all that it breeds.
Because, like, for me, it kind of comes back to something, because I try to understand that some people, they're not being trolls for the sake of being trolls necessarily. Many are, and you're right. But a lot of times what I see and what almost hurts more is the person that says, I'm not having fun. Therefore, no one should be having fun.
Right.
And
it's
it's just like, bro, like I'm having a great time, you know? Yeah. Beard will tell you, like, there was a time where I told him, like, you need to fucking step back from Destiny right now before I punch you. This was back in Destiny 1.
Well, even this last week he was having issues with this too.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a nice long talk last week about it, and just like, hey, you don't need to feel like you have to do this. If it's not fun, don't do it.
Right.
I mean, yes, you're a part of our show, but don't feel like you have to prove to anybody. Do something that you're enjoying.
Yep.
That's what people want. They don't want necessarily all the knowledge and stuff like that. Yes, it's nice, but they want you.
And he doesn't understand that. He literally has no concept of that. Because he doesn't understand that there are lots of people putting that information out in various different ways.
Yeah.
But people latch on a personality, and he's got a good way of putting it. He's a good guy, and you know, he's one of those folks that he will always put out 250%, even if it's going to kill him, because he thinks the effort is what got him where he is, and that's just not true. Production value is great, and knowledge is great, but it's like we said, all the technique in the world doesn't mean shit if you don't express it in a way that is palatable to the listener, which he does. He excels at that. And I think that someday he may understand that for a split second, but then he'll go back to working really hard because, you know.
I understand the working really hard thing too.
I do too. Absolutely.
I mean, anybody who I think really, not necessarily deserves, anyone who has really worked for what they do understands that working hard does help. It is not the end all be all. You can work for days and days to be a blacksmith, but if you just don't have the strength to actually be a blacksmith, you might not be that great. You might not end up being the world's best blacksmith, even though you work at it forever and ever and ever. I mean, that's just one of the sad realities that, yes, work does help. It will make things better, but it's not the answer to everything.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times, too, it comes down to, we're talking about creative endeavors, whether it's music or YouTube or Twitch or whatever. There are, right now, there's someone streaming on some platform, and they are killing it, and no one's watching.
Yep.
And sometimes it's just that perfect timing of getting in someone's crosshairs, and, you know, like, Beard will be the first one to say, well, you know, Mylan did this. Like, no, you did it. He just happened to see it. And so they'll be like, hey, you need to see this. And anytime we get that opportunity to be seen at our best, that's when, you know, that talent hopefully would shine through. And, you know, I think that's a lot of what our industry really kind of boils down to is like, you know, how do I get seen? How do I, you know, and then you see other streams that, frankly, are not very entertaining, but they've got thousands of people watching for some reason. But I don't.
There's an entertainment value that they find.
Right. So to me, it boils down to work hard, but know that if you're enjoying it, someone else will, and it's just a matter of getting yourself in that place where they can see it and enjoy it, which is something I think that we all work at. How do I break through the next thing? Like, Grant has a great approach, which I have adopted because he just like, here's how I do it. Basically, he just crawls up everyone on Twitter's ass. And he's really good at it. And so what I just started doing was like, all right, I can play piggyback. So I just started putting a notification. Like, every time I find a conversation, I actually have something to add, even if it's just a funny thing. I'm like, I'm going to talk about this now. And the funny part,
Handsome Dragon does the same thing.
It works, though.
All over Twitter. Yeah, it does. And if that's the platform that you are able to do that on, awesome. My platform, I mean, we were talking about this before the show went live. My platform is podcasting. I am better at the podcasting side than I am on Twitch, mainly because podcasting I record once a week. Twitch, I don't have time to be able to stream because of family and work and all that other stuff. So that's something that's not available yet. Could I do it someday? Maybe.
I think you could. I mean, you're holding your own here, so don't worry about that. Because a live conversation, even though, you know, you're used to recording it, it's sometimes it's funny because you have to, like, there's a skill in just talking to oneself. Like, you have to rehearse. You have to rehearse narrating every fucking thing. Like, I was making tea. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put the leaves in here because the reason we do it this way is because this is and my community makes fun of me when I'm playing Watch Dogs, like we talked about before the show, because I will talk through why I do things the way I do it. Because, and I was like, well, the human brain wants to, you want to adhere inside lines, and there's this artificial circle in which is, we're staying in for the, source of this, and even though I'm hidden in a place where the only way you can get to me is to go outside of that line, but the human brain will not allow him to leave that line because it's just the way he's been taught to stay inside because he's been coloring his whole life. And people just laughed. So, like, there's this meme, the human brain, and I actually
It's like the whole thing, we want to be teachers. We want to be able to show people how we do things. And it's not always the case as far as Twitch or anything like that goes, because sometimes it is, yes, you want to teach somebody something and you want to be able to describe why you do something. But there's also because being funny for funny's sake is difficult when you don't have an audience to bounce off of.
Right.
I did comedic acting when I was living in Kansas. I was in the theater, and I always got the comedic roles because I could engage with the audience and feel what they needed at that time. So whether I was playing Iago from Aladdin, and granted, you could play Iago like Gilbert Godfrey. Thank God I did not, but
he's one of my favorites.
Oh my God, guys! But it's just, you have to be able to read an audience. And Twitch, it's difficult to do that on Twitch, I think, because you don't have the actual connection.
Right.
Unless there's a lot of feedback coming from chat. And that's hard to do. That's super hard to do.
So I find that with that, you have to just create context. And eventually someone's going to latch onto it. So, like, my community kind of created context for me, because the comedy from my stream came from one place before, where I would, like, comment on the absurdity of what was going on, or I'd be within a game. Like, for example, Until Dawn, which is a great basically choose your own adventure horror game. There's a wolf in the third act of that game that you can ignore it and you never see it again. But if you care for it and release it, it will protect you and give you an extra chance at surviving a certain encounter. And you also have the ability and the opportunity to save that wolf from something that happens. I don't want to spoil anything. And I decided that character was the most important character to save in the entire game. I named him. His name is Horus. Then when Rise of Iron came out, I went walking around. I'm like, I know he's here. He's here somewhere. And I walked up. I'm like, Horus, how you been, dude? And I, like, fist bumped him. Right. And for me, like, I was like, there's Horus. And, like, that was kind of where my thing was. I would find and latch on to things. I would just, kind of find something to latch onto, and then hopefully give them an in to latch onto. Then I changed schedules. I started streaming for a different audience, and I've always had a tendency to kind of go off the rails with, like, the raunchy humor on some level. But then some people came in the stream and they enabled that. They were just like, go for it. They're like, go for broke. And it just became one of the things. It just becomes part of the context, because now we wear the mature label like a badge of honor. And we say, look, this is a place where you can be included. You can be who you are. Let your freak flag fly, as long as you're letting everyone else's freak flag fly. And that's kind of what we've kind of staked our claim on. There were some conversations, I will say, almost 3 or 4 times a night on community night. When did I lose control? Because I've lost complete control. It's its own thing now. I'm just there to, like, give them, like, I am the banner of the public event. You rally to my flag. And I just sit there. And once the event starts, I disappear. You get your super,
you, like,
you start
Rise of Iron?
See?
I mean, it's easy to do, but it's fun to do too.
Absolutely. It's I think there's not nearly enough sex jokes in Destiny, honestly.
Yeah. There's plenty. It's just a lot of people don't know where to dig in for those little sex jokes because the Vex are written with just so many jokes you could make.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
there's much.
Well, for example, you think about like I've often said like there's probably slashfic that like likens Cade 6 to like Commander Data in Star Trek. He's been programmed with how many techniques, right? Because he's basically, depending upon how he's programmed, he could be reprogrammed to be a gigantic sex toy if you wanted.
Right. Depending on if he has his own control over himself or if he has somebody controlling him. That could be a fun little adventure time.
Yeah, it would be something, and it would be interesting. But then you talk about like, okay, so now we're talking about a human essence inside of what amounts to a 6-foot tall dildo. Now, potentially having penetrative sex with what amounts to a corpse.
Depending on who you're having. Right. Yeah, it depends on who. Like if you're going after Oryx or whatever.
Right.
That guy's already horny, so.
Well, yeah, like he tried retroactive abortion, didn't work out so great with that sword.
Right. He also went through a sex change already, so.
Right.
To each their own.
Yeah, I could see that though. Like Cade 6 and Oryx at a bar. Cade 6 and Oryx walk up to a bar, and can you just imagine like, how you been? I just came in from the rings of Saturn. Boy, my wings tired. And I just imagine like this whole thing going on between them, and then they have one too many, and they think it's a great idea. Don't touch me there. I'm not sure why he sounded like Christian Bale, but
it's fine. Bane, we can do Christian Bale or Bane, whatever. I actually know that Bane would be Gaul.
No one knew who I was until I grew a penis. It's funny. I think that there's space for interpretation, right? And I think that's one of the coolest things about anything, any art, any information. And I think it's something that when we talk about education and culture, although it may be one of the hardest things to teach, it is so important to learn.
It is. And kind of what we were just doing, improvisation is the willingness not to say no.
Yeah.
And improvisation is what breeds creativity. And it's being able to put yourself out there, even though the joke may fall flat or it may be great. But you and I riffing off each other right then, teaching that in a high school setting is difficult because we have so much structure that it's limiting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And if we had that ability to let kids do something without having to say, no, you can't do that, that's not the way you do it, that would help breed more actual creativity.
Yeah. So there you go, folks. Nancy Reagan was wrong. Don't say no. Say yes. Be willing to say yes to anything except perhaps drugs. And even then, that's arguable, but that's a different podcast.
Right.
But as far as the official podcast is concerned, that's in Grindhead this week. I want to thank GrnEyedMusikLvr here. Where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter with GrnEyedMusikLvr. It is kind of spelled out weird, so basically go find Grindhead's, Jim's Twitter, and then go through his friends list until you find me, because my name is spelled funny, and I don't feel like spelling it out because it's like 16 characters long. But
it'll be linked below. It'll be linked below for you guys in the description. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. Too. Yes, on Discord for Focused Fire Chat.
For sure.
Yep. Thank you so much for stopping by.